The sound of breaking glass had barely faded when the entire lobby of the Ashgrove Grand held its breath. Cormac Valenti, 29 years old and heir to the most ruthless crime syndicate on the eastern seaboard, had just driven his fist through the concierge desk's tempered glass panel. Not because anyone had wronged him, but because the Wi-Fi had disconnected mid-call. Security stood frozen near the revolving doors. The general manager had locked himself in his office. The bellhops stared at the marble floor as if it contained the answer to a prayer. Nobody moved, nobody dared. Except for Rory Kane, 26, who had been awake for 19 hours, had spilled coffee down her uniform 20 minutes ago, and still had 6 hours left on a double shift she'd picked up to cover her brother's physical therapy bill. She set her clipboard on the check-in counter with a quiet click. She walked across the lobby toward the man who had just destroyed a $4,000 fixture. "Sir." Her voice carried over the silence with the calm precision of someone who had talked a dozen belligerent guests down from ledges they didn't realize were ledges. "I'm going to need you to step back from the desk." Cormac Valenti turned slowly. He was tall, dark-haired, built like something sculpted specifically to make other people feel small. There was blood on his knuckles from the glass. He looked at her the way a lit match looks at dry kindling, expectant. "Who are you?" "The person who has to file the incident report." Rory held his gaze without blinking. "And right now that report is very long. You can make it shorter by stepping back." "Do you know who I am?" The question came out low and deliberate, the kind of voice that had made grown men wet themselves in parking garages. "I know you're standing in my lobby bleeding on a marble floor that gets cleaned once every 4 hours." Rory reached behind the ruined desk and produced a small first aid kit, the kind kept for paper cuts and minor disasters, though this was neither. She set it on the counter in front of him. "I also know you're going to need stitches, and the nearest urgent care is 6 blocks east. So before you decide what you'd like to do next, I'd suggest you take a breath." Cormac stared at her. The violence radiating off him like heat from a stove seemed to flicker. He was used to people backing away. He was used to people apologizing for things that weren't their fault. He was not used to a woman in a rumpled hotel uniform looking at him like he was a slightly inconvenient problem she was being paid to solve. "You're not scared of me," he said. "It wasn't a question. It sounded more like a discovery." "I'm on hour 19 of a double shift," Rory said. "I'm too tired to be scared. Sit down before you pass out. The lobby chairs are Italian leather and very comfortable. The blood will spot them, but I'll deal with that later." For one long tectonic moment, nothing happened. The security guards didn't breathe. The bellhop near the elevator actually closed his eyes. Then Cormac Valenti sat down. He sat in the Italian leather chair and pressed the gauze she'd handed him against his knuckles. And the lobby exhaled around him, like a building that had forgotten it was allowed to have air. Rory went back to her desk. She made a note on her clipboard. She did not acknowledge the small, private earthquake that had just moved through her chest. The knock came at her apartment door 3 nights later. 2 sharp raps, then 1, the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. Rory was at her kitchen table sorting through a pile of explanation of benefits forms that had been multiplying on her counter like a virus. Her brother Danny's medical bills were, at this point, essentially a second mortgage on a house she didn't own. She'd been staring at a $14,000 imaging invoice. For so long the numbers had stopped making sense. She looked through the peephole. A man she didn't recognize stood in her hallway, short silver hair, a wool overcoat that cost more than her monthly rent, a carved wooden cane with a handle shaped like a compass rose. Behind him, barely visible, 2 very large shapes in dark suits. "Miss Kane." The voice through the door was measured, patrician. "My name is Silvio Valenti. I believe you met my son." Rory stood very still for a moment. Then she unlocked the door. Silvio Valenti, 63, walked into her apartment with the ease of a man who understood that all rooms belonged to him eventually. His eyes moved across the stack of bills, the single plant on the windowsill that was barely alive, the twin bed visible through the open bedroom door. "You have a gift," Silvio said, turning to face her. "My son has destroyed 2 other hotels in the past year. At both of them, staff ran. At one, security called a priest. The corner of his mouth moved, the ghost of amusement. You handed him gauze and told him to sit down. He talked about nothing else for 2 days. He damaged hotel property," Rory said. "I did my job." "Yes, that's exactly the point." He produced an envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table beside the EOB forms. The sound it made against the paper was deliberate. "Cormac has cycled through 9 advisors in 8 months, Silvio said. "Not bodyguards. He dismantles those. Advisors. People meant to keep him focused on schedule and below the threshold of federal scrutiny, he respects none of them. He listens to none of them. Silvio looked at her steadily. He listened to you. He sat down, Rory said. That's not the same as listening. In Cormac's case, Silvio replied, it is. Rory looked at the envelope. She didn't open it. What exactly are you hiring me to do? Keep him functional. Attend meetings with him. Keep him sober before noon. Ensure he doesn't cause the kind of incident that ends up in a federal brief. Silvio paused. The salary is $9,000 a week, tax-free. A corporate apartment on Beacon Hill, fully furnished. The number landed on her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She did the math without meaning to. Danny's imaging bill, the physical therapy schedule, the specialist in New Haven who might actually be able to help him walk without a cane before he turned 30. I'm a concierge, Rory said. I book restaurant reservations. You manage chaos, the skill transfers. And if he touches me, the question was flat. Professional, she'd learned a long time ago that the conditions of a thing mattered more than the thing itself. Silvio's expression didn't waver. If my son touches you in anger, you have my explicit permission to respond in whatever manner you see fit. He'll have earned it. Rory looked at the bills. She thought about Danny and his PT appointments, jaw set, refusing to let her see how much it hurt. She thought about the specialist's waiting list and how she'd been told the out-of-pocket cost and had laughed in a way that scared the receptionist. I need it in writing, she said, the terms. Silvio almost smiled. Of course. The corporate apartment on Beacon Hill was the kind of place Rory had only ever seen in films. High ceilings, original molding, windows that looked out over the Charles River, turning silver in the October light. She stood in the middle of it for 45 seconds, letting herself feel exactly one moment of awe, and then she opened her laptop and started building a schedule. She met Cormac the next morning in the penthouse suite of the Valenti Group's downtown office tower. He was shadowboxing in the main room when she arrived, shirtless, headphones in, completely ignoring the three men seated around the conference table who were pretending not to be terrified. Rory walked to the windows and raised the blinds. Cormac flinched at the sudden light. Good morning, she said. You have a call with the Harbor Development Board in 40 minutes. I need you showered, dressed, and in possession of the briefing document I sent you last night. Cormac pulled out one earbud. He looked at her with the particular expression of someone encountering a puzzling species in an unexpected habitat. You're early. You're late. Those are different things. Rory set her bag on the conference table and nodded to the three men. Gentlemen, can I get you coffee while he gets ready? I didn't read the briefing document, Cormac said. I know. Rory pulled a printed copy from her bag and held it out to him. Read it in the shower. The pages are laminated. One of the men at the table made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Cormac looked at the laminated document in her outstretched hand for a long moment. He took it. You're strange, he said, heading toward the back hallway. You're 30 minutes behind schedule, she replied. We can discuss my personality later. The first 2 weeks were a sustained test she hadn't agreed to take. Cormac changed meeting times without telling her, and then appeared at her elbow, demanding to know why she hadn't updated the calendar. He drove to a dock in South Boston at 2 a.m. and texted her the address, apparently expecting her not to show up. She showed up. He drove 95 miles an hour on the highway back, which she handled by putting her feet on the dashboard and reading aloud from the briefing document for the next morning's zoning board meeting, while he stared at her like she'd grown a second head. By the end of the second week, he was on time to 4 out of 5 meetings. It wasn't compliance. It was something quieter and more complicated than that, the way a very tired person finally stops fighting the thing that helps them sleep. She learned him the way you learn a building, where the structural weaknesses are, where the load-bearing walls sit, what you can renovate, and what you cannot touch without bringing the whole thing down. He learned her differently. She wasn't sure he realized he was doing it. It was a Tuesday night in November when everything cracked. They were leaving a closed-door meeting at a private dining club in the South End, the kind of room where city contracts got decided over 40-year-old scotch and handshakes that never made it into writing. Rory had spent 3 hours in the anteroom managing the schedule, fielding calls, and eating what she suspected was the best bread she'd ever had in her life. The car was waiting at the curb. Cormac's driver, a quiet man named Will, who had worked for the Valentis for 11 years, was behind the wheel, engine off, both hands on the wheel, perfectly still. Rory stopped. Wait, she said. It's cold, Cormac said. Let's go. Look at Will. She kept her voice level. Engine's off. It's November. He's got his hands at 10 and 2 and he's staring straight ahead like he's trying to memorize the windshield. 1 beat. 2. His demeanor changed the way a sky changes before a storm. Subtle shift in pressure, then everything at once. "Get back inside," he said quietly. "Cormac!" Now, he stepped in front of her, putting his body between her and the car. "Go back through the side entrance and stay with the kitchen staff until I send someone for you." "There's a side alley to the left of the building," Rory said, her voice completely flat because she was using every available resource to stay calm, and there was none left for tone. 2 men. I clocked them when we pulled up." Cormac went still. "You clocked them?" "I was a night manager in South Boston for 3 years before the Ash Grove." She met his eyes. "I notice when people are somewhere they shouldn't be." He looked at her for 1 second, just one, with an expression she couldn't fully read. Then, "Side door. Kitchen. Don't open it for anyone who doesn't say harbor light. Go." She went. She made it to the kitchen, where 4-line cooks and a dishwasher looked up at a woman in a blazer, appearing through their side door with the composure of someone who regularly crashed kitchens. She held up both hands. "Nobody panic. I just need to wait here for a few minutes. Can I use the corner?" The head cook, a woman named Bet who had seen stranger things in 30 years of restaurant work, pointed to the dry storage. "Back left. There's a stool." "Thank you. You're all doing great." The gunshots started 2 minutes later. 4, maybe 5, then silence, then a car engine screaming away into the night. She sat on the stool in the dry storage, breathing through her nose, and waited. 22 minutes later, someone knocked on the kitchen door and said, "Harbor light." Will was dead. 3 of the attackers were not, which meant they were alive somewhere being talked to in a way that wouldn't make the news. Cormac had a graze on his left arm and a look in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not rage, not bravado. Something older, and more tired than both. He looked at her when she walked out of the kitchen. She was still holding the stool, which she set down carefully. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's a graze. It needs cleaning." She glanced at Bet, who had materialized with a first aid kit the way good restaurant workers always seem to have exactly the tool that's needed. "Thank you, Bet." Bet handed it over without comment. They sat in the dining club's private back room while Rory cleaned the wound and Cormac said nothing. He watched her hands. "You spotted the driver before I did," he said. "You were focused on the exit. I was scanning the car because that's what I do when I'm walking someone out at night." She taped the bandage in place. "Hotel work. Same principle." "Not the same principle at all." "Why didn't you run?" Rory sat back. She thought of Danny at 16. The night their stepfather had come home loud and broken-looking, and how she had learned very early that the only exit from a room like that was through the middle of it. "Running makes you a target," she said. "Staying makes you a witness. I prefer being a witness." He studied her for a long moment. "Thank you. It's in the job description." She closed the first aid kit. "Keep the client functional." Something shifted in his expression, small, involuntary, like a door moving an inch. It closed again quickly, but she'd seen it. The betrayal came dressed in a good suit, as it always does. His name was Harmon Prescott. Silvio's chief of operations, silver-tongued and perpetually calm in a way that Rory had never fully trusted. He'd been pleasant to her from day one, which was its own kind of warning sign. 3 days after the South End incident, they were assembled in the Valenti Group's private conference room. Silvio, Cormac, Prescott, and 2 senior associates. Someone had tried to kill Cormac, someone with access to the schedule, the private Tuesday dinner, the car arrival time, the exact exit route. "Cormac, Rory, Prescott." Prescott opened his leather folder with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already decided what would happen in this room. "The route information was pulled from the shared calendar at 6:47 p.m., Prescott said. "The access log shows the pull came from an external device, a phone registered to a Daniel Kane." He slid a printed document across the table. Rory's brother, who as of last week had a $14,000 medical debt cleared by a wire transfer from a shell account linked to the Marchetti family. The same family that sent the shooters. The room went silent in a specific way. The silence of people waiting to see which direction a very dangerous thing would fall. Rory felt the floor shift under her. She knew what the document said. She knew how clean it would look. She also knew Danny would never, could never. She thought of the PT appointments, the specialist's number still in her phone, the way Danny had cried when she told him about the new job, because he knew what it had cost her to accept anything from anyone. "That's not possible," Rory said. "Rory, Cormac's voice was controlled in the way she recognized. The way he controlled himself right before something broke. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the document. "Cormac, look at me." He didn't. The amount cleared matches a payment routed through 3 accounts. Prescott kept his voice regretful in the precise way of someone performing regret. "I'm sorry, but the evidence is what it is. The evidence is fabricated." Rory's voice was steady. She was watching Prescott's face, because she'd spent years reading people who didn't want to be read, and Prescott was doing something with his hands that people only did when they were performing rather than feeling. Check when he accessed the shared calendar. Ask yourself how he knew to pull the schedule 12 hours before the Marchetti crew arrived. Prescott looked at her with the placid patience of a man who had already won. Cormac stood. He still wasn't looking at her, and that was the part that cut. Not the accusation, not the room full of men deciding her fate, but the one person she'd been steadying herself against for 6 weeks, refusing to meet her eyes. "Get her out of the building," Cormac said. "Keys, phone, badge, she's done." "Cormac." Her voice cracked, just slightly. She hated it. "He's lying. Check the calendar access time. Check Prescott's accounts. Don't do this." 2 men she didn't know took her by the arms. She didn't fight them, because fighting would have looked exactly like what Prescott needed it to look like. She was walked out through the service entrance and left on a side street in the rain. The door closed behind her with the soft final sound of a lock clicking into place. She stood in the rain for 10 seconds. Then she started walking. She'd been walking for 20 minutes, soaked through, when the dark sedan pulled up slowly beside her, and Prescott's window rolled down. "Get in, Rory," he said. "We need to have a conversation." She looked at him. She thought of Danny's phone number. She thought of the fact that if Prescott had framed her, he'd done it because he needed something, which meant he wasn't finished yet. She got in. The drive took 40 minutes, during which Prescott explained, in the smooth and comfortable way of a man who had been waiting a long time to say this out loud, that the Marchetti family had offered him an equity partnership in the port operations when the Valentis fell. All he needed was Cormac dead. All he needed from Rory was her face on a video call, proof of life that would pull Cormac out of the fortified office and into the open. "You think he'll come for me," Rory said, "after he just threw me out?" "Guilt," Prescott said, "is a very reliable compass." The facility was a converted waterfront warehouse, the kind of place that smelled of salt and had no cameras because nobody legal wanted cameras there. 2 men with serious firearms walked her inside. A camera on a tripod had been set up in the center of the space. "We go live in 15 minutes, Prescott said, checking his watch. "Look distressed. It won't be difficult." He stepped away to confer with someone near the back wall. Rory looked at the camera. She looked at the 2 men, one by the door, one near the equipment table. She looked at the table, which held among other things a laptop on an extension cord, a zip-tie dispenser, and a heavy metal staple gun of the construction variety, the kind used for securing tarps over shipping containers. They hadn't restrained her hands yet. Prescott's men were organized and dangerous, but they thought she was a hotel concierge. Hotel concierge don't run. One of the guards moved to adjust the camera angle. The other stepped toward the door to check the perimeter. Rory picked up the staple gun. She crossed the space in 4 steps and caught the distracted guard across the back of the skull with the flat of it. Not a killing blow, a concussive one, enough to drop him and buy 30 seconds. He hit the floor like something switched off. Prescott spun. He had a gun out, which she had expected. She had already moved behind a stack of shipping pallets. The shot hit the wood 2 feet above her head. She heard him shout to the man near the door, heard heavy boots on concrete, and was already moving along the wall toward the back of the warehouse. Low fast, using the pallets and equipment crates for cover the way she'd once used display stands and room service carts during the hotel's annual intruder drill, which had gotten oddly competitive. There was a side door, padlocked. She looked up. A freight ladder bolted to the wall, leading to a catwalk. Old iron, stables, dress shoes scraping against the rungs, and came out on the catwalk above the floor just as the second guard reached the base of the ladder. She ran the catwalk at full speed, found the roof access hatch, pushed through it, and stepped out into cold November air and open sky. The roof was flat. The drop to the alley below was 25 feet onto a pile of broken-down cardboard boxes that had been there since summer. She jumped. The landing knocked the wind from her and lit up her right knee in a way that was going to be a problem for a week, but she was on her feet in 5 seconds and moving. She found a main road. She found a gas station, lit up like a lantern against the dark. The clerk behind the counter, a college-age kid named Terry, according to his name tag, looked up as she pushed through the door. She was wet, limping, had a grease mark from the staple gun on her blazer, and was breathing like she'd run a race. "I need to borrow your phone," she said. "Please." "Store policy," Terry started. "Terry." She put both hands on the counter. "I will explain everything, I promise. But I need the phone right now, and when this is over, I will personally have someone call your manager and tell them you did exactly the right thing. Okay?" Terry looked at her for 2 full seconds. He handed over the phone. "Thank you." She was already dialing from memory. "And Terry, please stay behind the counter. Just stay low." It rang twice. "Talk." Cormac's voice, cold flat, the voice he used for things already past the point of discussion. "It's Rory." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Prescott is the leak. He framed me and then had me picked up. I'm at a gas station on Harborview Road, 2 miles from the waterfront. He has people at that warehouse, and when he doesn't hear from them in the next 10 minutes, he'll know I'm loose." Silent beat 2. "Rory." His voice was different now. Something had broken through the cold. "Are you hurt?" "My knee is going to have opinions about stairs for a while, but I'm standing." She glanced at the dark window, the empty road beyond. "Cormac, whatever you think about me right now, don't let him win." "I'm coming. Stay inside, away from the windows." "Already on it." She handed the phone back to Terry. "Thank you, genuinely." "Are you okay?" Terry asked wide. "I've been better." She looked toward the front windows. "Terry, do me a favor and go wait in the back room for a few minutes, just as a precaution." Should I be worried? Probably not. She thought very deliberately about every story she'd ever heard where a bystander got left without a resolution. "But I'd rather you definitely weren't. Go on. I'll come get you when it's clear. You have my word." Terry went. 12 minutes later, when it was over and the street outside was full of Valenti vehicles and men moving with purpose, Rory went to the back room and told him it was safe. She waited while he called his manager. She made sure he was fine before she walked out the door. He was. He went home that night to his roommate and told the whole story twice, and nobody believed him, which was probably for the best. Prescott's car arrived at the gas station 11 minutes after she'd hung up. 2 men got out. The front window of the station lasted about 40 seconds after that. Rory was in the side alley when she heard the second set of vehicles. Not Prescott's, something bigger and faster, coming from the north. 2 SUVs and a sedan cut the intersection and blocked the street, and the men who got out moved with the focused economy of people who were not wasting time. Cormac was out of the lead SUV before it had fully stopped. He wasn't wearing the suit. He was wearing something dark and practical, and the way he moved across the wet asphalt toward the alley, toward her, was different from every other time she'd watched him cross a room. He reached her. He stopped. She was leaning against the alley wall, soaking wet, one knee bent slightly because straight hurt more. "I told you," she said. "I told you to check the calendar access time." "I know." His voice came out raw. He reached out and gripped her shoulder, just her shoulder, carefully, like she might be made of something that could break. "I know. I was wrong." He stopped. The next word seemed to cost him something significant. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a small word from him. She understood that. "Go deal with Prescott," she said. "Then we can talk about it." He looked at her for a long moment. His hand stayed on her shoulder. "You got out on your own," he said. "You were busy being wrong about me. I didn't have time to wait." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something more honest than that. "Stay here. My people will stay with you." "I know," she nodded once. "Go." He went. She heard it later, at a remove. Not the details, not the full conversation Prescott had attempted about leverage and federal files, and the kind of insurance policy cornered men always seem to think they've purchased. Cormac had listened to all of it. He had the patience, she'd learned, of someone who already knows the answer and is simply waiting for the other person to finish arriving at it. Prescott had miscounted the things he held. The recovery took 10 days. Rory spent most of them in the Beacon Hill apartment, her knee elevated on a pillow, researching the New Haven specialist's cancellation window on her laptop, because the appointment was Thursday and the logistics were complicated. Cormac ran the Valenti business from her living room. He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain himself. He showed up at 7 a.m. the first morning with 2 coffees, set one on her table without ceremony, and settled in the armchair by the window with his briefing documents like he'd been doing it for years. On the 5th morning, Rory said, "Danny's appointment is Thursday, in New Haven." "I know," Cormac said, not looking up. "I arranged the car." She stared at him. "You arranged?" "You were on the phone with the clinic for 20 minutes the night before. The walls aren't thick." He turned a page. Driver picks you up at 7. He'll wait however long it takes. Rory looked at the side of his face. He had circles under his eyes and was wearing a sweater that had seen better days, and was reading a zoning variance document with the focused energy of someone who had decided to be useful rather than apologetic, she was beginning to understand how he did most things. "Thank you," she said. He looked up. The expression on his face was the same one she'd glimpsed for half a second in the dining club back room. The door that had opened an inch and swung quickly back, except this time it stayed open a little longer. "Don't thank me," he said. "Get some sleep. You look terrible." "You look worse." "I've been sleeping in your armchair." "I know." She pulled her blanket up. "There's a guest room." "The armchair is fine." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything else. 6 months later, the Ashgrove Grand had a new concierge desk. Same location, different glass. Stronger. The lobby had other new things too. Things most guests wouldn't notice. The security feed running to 3 separate locations. The quiet men stationed at points that looked casual until they didn't. The way the general manager moved through the space with a particular steadiness that comes from knowing exactly who has his back. Rory walked through the lobby on a Thursday evening in May, not wearing her uniform. She was wearing a dark green dress Danny had picked out when she'd asked for his opinion, because Danny had always had a better eye than she did, and he was walking now. Cane optional, the specialist had said, writing something in her chart and nodding, and he had started having opinions about things again, which was the best sign she knew. Cormac was 2 steps behind her. Not directing, not pulling ahead, just present, available. Unusually patient for a man who had once destroyed a $4,000 glass panel over a Wi-Fi connection. They took a table near the windows, the same windows she'd walked past for 3 years on her way to the service corridor. The server who approached was new, young, nervous in the particular way of people learning a room where the ambient stakes run slightly higher than normal. He held the menus with both hands. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" Cormac looked at the wine list. He looked at the cocktail menu. He set both down. "Just water." He glanced at Rory. 2. The server looked relieved to have a simple order. He started to turn. "Sparkling for her," Cormac added. "Still for me." Rory looked at him. "What?" he said. "You ordered sparkling water. You like sparkling water. You've never once." "I've started paying attention." He said it simply, like it wasn't anything, and picked up the menu. The server returned with both waters and set them down carefully, clearly proud of the successful execution. "Thank you," Rory said. "You're doing great." The real smile that surprised itself out of the kid's face would have made her laugh if she weren't busy looking out the window at the street she'd walked every morning for 3 years, at the lobby she could have mapped blindfolded, at the table where she was sitting not as an employee but as the woman Cormac Valenti had, apparently, decided to start paying attention to. She thought of a conference room, and a fabricated document, and a man who hadn't met her eyes when she'd needed him to. She thought of a warehouse catwalk in November rain. She thought of Danny taking 4 steps without his cane while the specialist nodded and made a note. She picked up her glass. Cormac picked up his. "To paying attention," she said. He touched his glass to hers with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned, slowly and in the hard way, that the most dangerous thing in any room isn't the person with the most power. It's the person who isn't afraid of it. "To paying attention," he said. And that was how a worn-out hotel concierge on hour 19 of a double shift taught the most feared man in Boston that sometimes the only thing standing between a loaded weapon and the rest of the world is someone too tired to flinch and stubborn enough to stay.